So, welcome back. We can start our next part of the conference. Before that, since ZAR has been mentioned in the first presentation, I would like to tell you that tomorrow evening, there will be an exhibition of ZAR, of a ZAR ensemble in Eldama Theater at 8 p.m. So for everyone that is interested, I can give you the address of the theater later. So we can move to the next presentation. Our next speaker is Julian Unger from the University of Heidelberg, and she will give a presentation with the title Semen of a Goddess, a re-examination of the pathogen A. Hello, this time we can hear you without problem. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
You can hear me all right. Good. So, hello everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conference, even though I can only join you online, unfortunately. My talk today will focus on the term A, often translated as poisonous semen, specifically as a pathogen in the ancient Egyptian medical texts. We will take a look at the translations and conceptualizations the term has gone through in the Egyptological literature, and then go back to the ancient Egyptian sources themselves, and based on them and with the term method, we hopefully arrive at a more defined understanding of this substance. So let's start with an overview of the Egyptological perspective. Already in 1853, Heinrich Pucksch tried to give meaning to the term A in a preliminary note on the medical papyrus Berlin 3038, and he translated this as sacred disease. However, he provides no further explanation for this assessment. In a paper on Papyrus Ebers in 1881, Gustav Scheutauer tried to identify it with chlorosis aegyptiaca, that is ankylostomiasis caused by an infection with parasitic hookworms. An influential analysis of the term A was undertaken by Benedict Bell in 1926, and he sought to identify it with hematuria, specifically caused by an infection with schistosomiasis. In a short note in 1935, Rowan Dawson argues for a relatively neutral translation of AA as influence, and he sees it not as a specific disease, but as a term to express illnesses of a vague and perplexing kind, which could not be located in any particular organ and which had no external manifestation. He also acknowledges the male and female origin of the term and its connection to semen. The approach of Abel was followed by Franz Jonckere in 1944, and he dedicated a small volume to the topic and agreed with Abel in identifying AAA as hematuria, but he opted for a more specified translation as amateurie parasitaire to emphasize the origin of the affliction. In 1961, as part of the groundbreaking Grundriss der Medizin der alten Ägypter, Hildegard von Deines and Wolfert Westendorf argued for an understanding of AAA as a pathogen that malevolent entities, both male and female, inserted into the patient's body, where it could spread and effectuate several afflictions. Paul Guyungui expressed serious doubts about the early identifications of AAA with schistosomiasis or ankylostomiasis in 1962. Rather, he stressed that the ancient Egyptians would have been unlikely to observe the parasitic worms responsible for these afflictions, and that polyinfestations with various parasites were a much more plausible scenario, resulting in a variety of different symptoms. Based on his work for the Grundriss, Wolfert Westendorf dedicated a huge part of his career to the study of ancient Egyptian medicine, and one of these follow-up studies was formative for the conceptualization, understanding, and translation of AAA in many later works on the topic. In 1974, Westendorf focused his interpretation of this pathogen on its relation to matut, that is semen or poison, a substantial number of recipes against AAA that are prescribed to be used before going to sleep, some materia medica with obvious sexual connotations also. And he saw these combined aspects as a very strong indication that in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, AAA was harmful and poisonous semen specifically that was inserted into the human body during forced sexual intercourse by malevolent divine or demonic entities. And Westendorf kept this notion of AAA as poisonous semen of incubus-like entities to such an extent that concerning the sources where AAA is mentioned as deriving from female entities, he wrote in 1999 that those are most likely due to mechanical copying of the common demonic pairs and therefore not intentional. Panayotis Kousoulis stresses the parallelism between matut and AAA in 2007 and sees them as toxic matter injected into the body by magical means, possibly analogous to or associated with ejaculation by a hostile entity. He also mentions their close connection to semen, as well as the possible origin from female entities. However, he doesn't elaborate on this apparent discrepancy. And finally, in 2022, Natalie Schmidt, in her work on divine bodily fluids, acknowledges the multitude of terminology for semen in the ancient Egyptian language, and its likewise ambiguity, often oscillating between poison, semen, and other liquids that could be ejaculated from the human body. However, with regards to AAA, she seems to favor Westendorf's approach of it being the semen of incubus-like male entities, and doesn't elaborate on its possible female origin. Now, with those approaches in mind, let us turn our attention back to the Egyptian sources themselves. For this purpose, I went through about 80 medical texts of varying extent on papyri and ostraka, and of these, indeed, only 7 altogether make mention of AAA. Concerning dating, said sources stem from the 17th to the 19th dynasty and dynasty 26, but outside of the medical texts, attestations of the term range from the pyramid texts to the 2nd century BCE. In the medical text, there are 29 direct mentions of the term, accompanied by 30 alternative recipes introduced by Kett. Now, given the research question I wanted to address here, I separated these recipes according to the specific origins of AAA mentioned in them. There are 5 recipe titles, 12 alternatives, and 3 spells, where the substance is said to derive from male entities only. And said entities are gods and undead, which are always used in combination here, never separately. Mentions of AAA originating from male and female entities, gods and undead in these cases can be found in 6 recipe titles, accompanied by 7 alternative recipes and 2 spells. Here, however, we find that the culprits are either god and goddess or male and female undead, and there are no combinations of those provenances. 14 further recipe titles, 11 alternatives, and 1 spell mention no origin of RR. And finally, there are no examples where RR is originating from only female entities in the text. So first, an important observation derived from these numbers is that Westendorf's assessment that instances of RR connected to female entities were rare cannot hold, especially not in light of the new evidence from the Brooklyn papyri. Rather, we have 18 sources connected to male entities versus at least 15 sources connected to male and female entities, and 25 sources without an origin mentioned. The body parts most commonly afflicted by RR are the torso, followed by hearty heart and torso in combination, but we can also find localizations in the back, the limbs, the head, and the rectum of the patient. Concerning symptoms and pathogens mentioned alongside RR, no differentiations between the different origin of the pathogen become apparent. The most common here is the residue substance, but we also find matter semen, setted substance, different influences of the undead, several symptoms connected to Eep heart and Hotty heart, which are quite difficult to interpret, and also Harrowwood worms are mentioned in one passage, and they are said to be caused by RR in the body, which was also central in the above-mentioned older identification of this term as schistosomiasis. Now, a central aspect of the study of every pathogen are naturally the materia medica employed during the treatment. The overwhelming majority of these, this is 72%, is plant-based in this case. Animal substances, minerals, beer, or honey are far less common. And this isn't so far interesting as I conducted similar research on other medical texts, and in them the overall part of the plant-based materials was always around 50%. On the other hand, we find in the recipes that I've gone through only 5 instances of substances that we would assess as so-called Dreckapotheke from a modern point of view, which is indeed quite marginal. A similar picture emerges if we are looking at the treatment methods employed. The majority of remedies against RR is applied orally, 39 times altogether. However, there's one peculiarity here because 17 of these are said to be specifically ingested before going to sleep, which is not attested in other contexts in the medical text so far. And this specific instruction was also, it can be found in Ebers, Hurst, and Papyrus Berlin against RR originating from male entities and RR without an origin mentioned. On the other hand, there are only 2 oral applications among the recipes from male and female entities. Against them, fumigations are most commonly employed. However, those are to be found exclusively in 7 consecutive recipes in Papyrus Berlin. Against RR from male and female entities, we further find 2 enemas and 1 instance where the windows and doors of a house were to be anointed. I further found 3 spells against male entities, 2 spells against RR from both genders, and 1 time against RR with no specific origin. And lastly, there's also 1 external application against RR without a distinct origin mentioned in the text. Now, treatments using more magical means are indeed rare against RR from male entities. In Papyrus Hurst recipe 85, an abject fish, its mouth filled with senecio resin, is to be cooked and eaten, and an accompanying spell is to be used. The second example is from the London Medical Papyrus for a pregnant woman, and here the treatment calls for a pastry in the shape of a donkey penis to be fed to a female cat. Against RR from male and female entities, we further find the above-mentioned fumigations in Papyrus Berlin 3038, which employ different kinds of feces and urine of a virgin, which have obvious iatromagical connotations. In overall observation, we might state that magical means seem not to have been of special importance in the treatment of RR, while the earlier Egyptological interpretations of the term have been vastly influenced by these, in comparison, rather few examples. And furthermore, there are no apparent differences in the materia medica and treatment methods with regard to the gender of the RR-producing entities. So what can we gather from the medical sources? First, based on its standard spelling, using the classifier D53, that is the penis with efflux, was obviously conceptualized as some bodily efflux. Gods, goddesses, and male and female undead were able to inject it into human patients of both gender, where it could act as a pathogenic substance. The danger of this happening seems to have been greatest at night, as indicated by the otherwise unattested conspicuous instruction to apply several remedies before going to sleep. And this pathogenic substance also poses a great threat to pregnant women, and it can further cause herod worms to develop in the body. Moreover, the symptoms manifesting due to an infection with RR must have been mostly internal, given the nature of the accompanying symptoms and the significant lack of external remedy applications. To broaden and thereby simultaneously specify the picture, let's take a short look at RR outside of the strictly medical sources. As I mentioned, the term is already attested in the Pyrrhon text and can still be found in the 2nd century BCE, although the overall number of attestations is rather small. It can be used either as a noun or a verb, both showing a very strong connection to the semantic fields of efflux and ejaculation, often, but not always, accompanied by notions of sexual intercourse. And there seem to be no obvious diachronic changes concerning the meaning of RR throughout Egyptian history, which becomes especially apparent when we look at the term in the pyramid text compared to late period healing studies in this regard. The last aspect I want to look at to gain a more thorough understanding of RR is the relationship of the later and the term metut, which is commonly translated as poison or semen, and sometimes as poisonous semen. So at least in view of their respective translations, both terms seem to be closely connected and might at a first glance even seem interchangeable. However, I would argue for a more differentiated approach based on the Egyptian sources, which in the end will hopefully lead us back to the main objective of my talk. So, spellings of metut regularly use either D53, again the penis with efflux, or D26, that is the mouth with efflux, and there is no apparent differentiation between the two determinatives regarding the meaning of metut. Reference to metut as poison is strongly connected to snakes and scorpions from the pyramid text to the Roman period. And here we also find a first obvious differentiation between the both terms. As a poisonous mentioned in animals with okay, the whole time or just
in the last few minutes. In the last few minutes.
Okay, I didn't change anything, so
No, now it's going well. Maybe without the camera on is better.
Yes. Okay, let's try that. Okay, just tell me if anything goes wrong again. So, all right, yes, in Papyrus Ebers, the term metut denotes actual semen in a treatise about the human vessel system. One instance mentioned it as the semen of an undead spirit in a spell during childbirth. There is another spell where it denotes the harmful semen of a god in the patient's body. Two recipes in Papyrus Brooklyn 75 and 86 are directed against the Metut of a male god. And lastly, there are two instances where we find Metut in close proximity to Aa. In Papyrus Berlin, recipe 58, Aa is mentioned of a god and goddess, followed by Metut of a male and female undead. And spell 13 of Papyrus Leiden 348 refers to both terms in an enumeration of several pathogens and malevolent influences. So as we can see from this, relations between Metut and Aa in the medical text are not very distinct or elaborate, although both terms seem to cover closely related semantic fields. It is, however, highly interesting that Metut, despite its much closer association with semen and reproduction, also occurs as originating from female entities, albeit rather rarely. Unfortunately, I can not go into more detail on this here because it would by far exceed the time span of this talk. Rather, let me now put together what we've discovered about the term Aa and how this might or rather even should influence our conceptualization and translation of this term. Given its classifiers and the context in which it appears, Aa was most likely conceptualized by the ancient Egyptians as a bodily efflux, strongly connected to, but not restricted to, the genital organs. However, as opposed to Metut, Aa shows no aspects of fertility, so to connect this term to semen in translation seems rather misleading. What I want to propose now, based on the sources I analyzed, is to step away from notions of semen in translations of Aa, since this has such a strong connotation to fertility and pregnancy in our modern languages. Rather, I would argue that there are numerous other kinds of efflux from the genital organs of males and females that were surely experienced by the Egyptians. Further, they will most likely have noted that not every sexual intercourse with an ejaculation naturally resulted in pregnancy. And on the intersection of these experiences, it doesn't seem too far-fetched to assume the existence of several different reasonings and therefore conceptualizations behind said effluxes, secretions, and discharges that can be emitted by penis and vagina alike, even though the known texts don't elaborate on them. Especially possible concurrences of discharges and other symptoms like abdominal pain or afflictions of the genital organs that are common with schistosomiasis and several other diseases might have been influential in the conceptualization of Aa as a harmful substance with strong connotations to sexual intercourse while not being connected to procreation itself. And on another level, this observation even brings us back somehow to the earliest Egyptological interpretations of the term, albeit from a totally different angle. Thank you.
Thank you, Julianne, for this very interesting presentation. And I think we have some questions from the public. Yes?
Thank you very much for this interesting topic. But you have mentioned that the semen is related to a certain male god. Is it related? I wonder if it is related to the myth of Osiris and Horus and Set, when there was a conflict between Horus and his hand was contaminated by this element, the semen, and he had to amputate his hand because it is harmful. So is it related?
Yes. I could not, as I said, go into detail here, but many of the attestations for Aa and Metut both come from the contendings of Horus and Seth, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I was looking forward to hearing because this substance or ailment has caught my attention too for my PhD, and because as you said, it could affect pregnant women, and I think it's really interesting like this patient coded to them, because I think perceiving this substance as something like the incubus, as Westendorf said, and maybe applying the gender studies could be really interesting to understand how they conceive this illness, because I think that the pregnant woman, when when is attacked with this the problem is that maybe she can deliver the child, and when medicine studies that the relationship between sex and pregnancy, one of the problems is that the constructions related to organs can make the pregnant woman deliver. So the texts surrounding the remedies where they is attacking the pregnant woman is indeed to prevent an abortion or a miscarriage. So I think that at least when the female patient is the target of this ailment, the translation should be something like the semen, because normally the pathogen is masculine, or when it's masculine and feminine, maybe it answers to the conceptualization that also proposed Dilleman, that the male and female spirits is something to prevent the attack for any kind of spirits, and not because the semen or the substance was conceived as female, because the semogram is always the phallus, as you said, and from my perspective, the Egyptians conceive they are always masculine, and maybe the female is just for as I said, to attack or to prevent the attack for any kind of a spirit, and not because it was conceived as female itself. I don't know what you think about that.
I'm not sure if I grabbed everything you said, but well, I find the mentions of originating from female entities too numerous to reduce it to some kind of standardization or automatic copying. So I would argue that the substance can be produced by females as well. Or yes, but and that's the point where I wanted to step away from this notion of semen, rather towards a more yes, the more overarching efflux, because there are many discharges of penis and vagina that even look a little bit like semen but are not, and yeah, as I said, I'm not sure I grabbed all your meaning, but I would.
Yeah, I see,
Yes.
but the point is that there are not female entities attacking male patients. So it's like, I don't know, it's something I was wondering. So,
Yes,
but
but
thank you.
AA can also afflict male patients and stem from female entities. So and it's not too obviously connected only to pregnancy. I mean, there are, of course, some texts that do that, but we also have this in treatments of the back and the abdomen, and so female patients are there, but they're not in the foreground in afflictions with AA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Julian, for your presentation, and we can move now to the next one. So I invite here Francesco Serrati from the École Normale Supérieure and École Pratique de Haute Études with the presentation Dry or Wet, a lexical approach to fumigation and fomentation in Egyptian, Greek, and Coptic.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So it works like this. Okay. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the organizer and the two institutions that allowed the organization to take place. So, smoke is a relatively common feature in the world around us. In antiquity, however, it was not confined solely to the magical religious sphere. Smoke and vapor were, in fact, the key elements of two therapeutic techniques that are two sides of the same coin, fumigation and fomentation. In this brief paper, after providing a preliminary definition of fumigation and fomentation, we shall identify the lexical roots that enabled Egyptian, Greek, and Coptic speakers to distinguish between the two techniques. By tracing these roots within the corpus of extant medical texts, we shall ultimately explore how this evolving terminology shapes the medical knowledge in Egypt. According to the New Sydenham's Lexicon of Medicine, fumigation is defined as a therapeutic procedure involving the exposure to fumes, especially the exposure to the body or a part of it, such as the skin or the respiratory mucous membrane, to fumes in order to produce a therapeutic effect. Fumigation may be dry or moist. In antiquity, these fumes were derived from burning plant, mineral, or animal substances, smoked directly onto the area requiring treatment. And fumigation was then usually carried out using a specialized device, such as a tube connecting a vase to a funnel, which served to collect and direct the smoke. According to the same lexicon, fermentation is defined as the application of flannel soaked in hot medicated decoctions or in warm water or of any other warm, wet, soft medicinal substance to some part of the body by which the vessels are relaxed and the pain reduced. When we talk of fermentation in antiquity, this definition does not necessarily apply. As Daniel Gurevich has noted in a paper from 1999, and I quote at the right part of the screen, fermentation in antiquity may consist of the equivalent of what the Sydenham Society called a moist fumigation. Hence, a technique that is carried out with the same instruments, but with water, urine, oil, etc., that does not burn and does not produce necessarily smoke, but vapors. Once the difference between these two techniques is clear, one might ask if dry versus wet opposition that is evident in English already existed in antiquity. The short answer is that this depends on the language. As a papyrology, I decided to center the question around Egypt, and we know that in Egypt, the three main languages used before the Arab conquest to talk about medicine were Egyptian, either classical or Neo-Egyptian, then Demotic, then Greek and Coptic, or at least for the pharmacological text, not properly medical text. Each of these languages has its own way to perceive the word and clearly to designate dry and wet substances. So in order to give this initial question an answer, I propose to consider the different languages one by one. The Egyptian language, which offers some of the most ancient occurrences of fumigation in the Mediterranean, does not appear to mark a linguistic difference between dry and moist fumigations, at least in the medical texts. In Egyptian medical texts, smoke, vapor, and the act of fumigating are indicated either by the verb kap or qahid, or by periphrasis. Let's see some example. The first example I wanted to consider comes from the Berlin Medical Papyrus, and it's the prescription number 75. It is to be prepared from someone probably suffering from tetanus. Willow and pyrethrum leaves, once dried, are to be ground into the liquid mesta and then mixed with sweet beer. The Egyptian text later says that the patient has to be fumigated, kap, and anointed with the mixture. Now, since the title of the prescription in red is Fumigation of the 12 Potter's Wheels, we can imagine that this stone support would have been heated somehow, allowing for what we could call a fermentation, since the mixture consisted not only of a dry part, but also of a wet part, such as the liquid mesta and the sweet beer. The evaporation of this mixture would have made possible the exposure of the patient to vapors and not smoke, while the subtle caramelization granted by the presence of the sweet beer would have made the consistency of the concoction suitable for anointing the body. A similar mechanism appears in recipe number 60 of the same papyrus, where the ingredients were to be placed on 7 potter's wheels that have been heated in the fire. The plant and mineral substances from the beginning of the prescription would then be sprinkled with mucilage and with a young girl's urine, allowing a fermentation, again, to take place. Sometimes, perhaps in order to solve this ambiguity, the treatises use periphrastic expressions or detailed description of what should be happening. See, for example, the prescription number 46 of the Berlin Medical Papyrus, where, in order to fight the serid secretion, the dry ingredients need to be ground and placed on 7 allegedly hot potter's wheels. The apparatus had to be covered with an upside-down lid with a hole pierced in the bottom, allowing a reed to enter. While the tip of this reed is in the patient's mouth, the vapor, never explicitly mentioned in the recipe but produced surely by means of beer poured over the stone, should be inhaled and spat or vomited out later. The same structure appears again in the... Sorry, does it work? Okay. The same structures appears again in the Ebers Papyrus recipe number 325. Without the beer pouring part, where we read, you will need to place your mouth over the opening of this tube, of this reed, so that you can inhale the smoke coming out of it. Hence, the smoke, which is indicated with hati, is generally the smoke of vegetal and mineral substances and not a vapor. In this medical text, however, the lack of lexical distinction between dry and moist fumigation is easy to explain. As we can see from these recipes, the apparatus needed for dry and moist fumigations is identical. The same basin and tubes, or even the same stones on which we heat up something. This implies that there is no reason to lexically mark a difference between the two processes. A doctor reading the prescription would apply the same logic to both procedures unless a more detailed and pragmatically richer prescription isn't needed. Does demotic solve the ambiguity we have observed in the more ancient Egyptian medical texts? The answer is that from the corpus already published, we would assume it partially does. Normally, in fact, the verb used to indicate a fumigation in demotic is the verb kap or kapi, inherited by the classical Neo-Egyptian kap, but with the change, eventual change, in the degree of occlusiveness of the first consonant. See, for example, this prescription from the London Leiden Magical Papyrus for a female patient who has her period. In this recipe, the female patient must be fumigated with the dung of an ichneumon, which, following the principle of the Drikapotheke, is encrypted in the demotic text. In this occurrence, we can observe that the verb kap is used to then introduce a dry fumigation. Let's consider another example. Okay. This example comes from the Vienna Demotic Medical Papyrus. So here we can firstly see the verb kapi, and then two other terms, roheb as a verb and roheb as a substantive. We then could ask ourselves, is this a fermentation? What roheb actually means in this context? Well, this term seems to be related to the Egyptian hab, a Semitic loanword that firstly appears in the supplementary chapters to the Book of the Dead, dating between the 26th dynasty and the Ptolemaic period, as shown in the edition by Annick Wittrich. In these chapters, notably the 163, the term roheb is used to designate the scorching breath of the dead, hence something we would associate with vapor. Thankfully, this is not the only occurrence of the term in the Egyptian texts. Another occurrence comes from a well-known demotic literary text, the myth of the Eye of the Sun, in which the word loheb is used to describe a mildly hot and sweet breath, hence not only that it is indeed similar to vapor, but something that is also aromatic. It seems we can understand why then the author of the recipe of the Vienna Papyrus hasn't utilized the term hati for smoke or vapor, but has chosen another term specific for breath and vapor. If these examples weren't enough, we have another one in Old Coptic. This example comes from the Greek Medical Papyrus 4, dating to the 4th century CE and conserved in the National Library of France. Here we read the term el-khob, specifically in a passage in which we have an historiola magica, hence anecdote, a magical anecdote. Here we can find the god Thoth that is speaking with Isis and discovers that Osiris is cheating on her with her sister Nephthys. Thoth then advises Isis, always present in the Greek magical papyri, from Egypt at least, to perform a ritual involving a nail that she has to dip in the blood of Osiris. Then at this point, the focus of the ritual changes and we have the mention of a brazier in which Isis has to prepare something. And each cooking-related action, in which we can see also el-khob, to steam, will affect Osiris's body, liver, heart, etc. We can then definitely say that loheb, the demotic loheb that we have here in Old Coptic as el-khob, and we will have in Boahiri Coptic as el-khob, but written with a khori, is exactly the idea of vapor. What can we say about the Greek tradition in Egypt? Well, we already have the important contribution by Daniel Gurevich that I have cited at the beginning of the presentation. In contribution, she gives some roots that are productive in Greek medical texts, notably the Corpus Hippocraticum, and that can qualify a fumigation or a fermentation, dividing these two with an opposition dry versus wet. We can have some cases in which the same root can indicate the two, but the term is completely different. For example, atmos for the fumigation versus atmis, vapor, for the fermentation. What we can say for the Greek medical papyri from Egypt? Well, we can say that the difference is actually respected. Moist fumigations, so fermentations, are present, for example, in the papyrus of the Ärztekammer Nordrhein 1, in which we can read that we use the term puria, and then in BKT 3 1921, where we use ionao again, or in BKT 3 1921, always the same, atmidi for vapor. Dry fumigations, we can find them in the Anonymous Londonensis, this doxographical text from the 1st century. Here we can find apothumiao or hypothumiao, from the root thum. Again, when the philosopher Democritus is brought back to life, smelling some bread, the vapors of the bread, the smoke of the bread, is considered dry and is indicated in Greek as atmos. And finally, we have another verb, the verb kapnizo, which is used in the final occurrence that involves the fumigation by deer horn and bitumen, about which we were talking about this morning. This verb allows me to do a smooth transition to the Coptic corpus, in which either the word kapnidze, so kapnizo, the Greek kapnizo, or the word kapnos are used to introduce a fumigation. We can use also some periphrastical constructions which are much rarer. See, for example, these two texts, and let's see if the word kapnizo is actually implying a lexical differentiation between dry and wet. Well, the first one comes from the great Cairo medical papyrus. We have clearly only dry materials which are fumigated, tek kapnidze, a moth, fumigate him with gallnut. So kapnizo respects the Greek and is considered as a verb for dry fumigations. The same applies in another a recipe from another Coptic papyrus, the BKU 125, in which we have the mention of a fruit maybe, and then we have again kapnidze emos, fumigate ha this time. But I couldn't conclude this intervention without underlying an anomaly. In two cases, only two, we find that the verb kapnos, in one that the name kapnos isn't used to introduce a fumigation, but a wet fumigation, hence a fermentation. And it's in the Michigan Iatrological manuscript number 136. In which we read, Mares chemos hijan peo kapnos. So let her sit over their stream for a fermentation involving the act of heating up some oil, sycamore oil specifically, with hot stones that will produce then vapor and not necessarily smoke. And the only one occurrence that I could have found about a periphrasis introducing fumigation is again a fermentation from again the great medical papyrus from Cairo. We have ma peschemos echrai ejov. She should sit over it, talking about boiling cumin allegedly in water. This study demonstrates a linguistic evolution in the medical terminology of the Nile Valley, shifting from the Egyptian cap, which obscured the distinction between dry and moist treatments, to a more nuanced Greek system that categorized smoke and vapor as distinct physical and therapeutic entities. While Demotic introduced the specific term loheb for vapor, suggesting an emerging lexical awareness of moisture, the later Coptic corpus paradoxically favored the Greek loanword kapnizo for both procedures. This suggests that while medical practice remained consistent across millennia, utilizing the same specialized apparatus for both fumigation and fermentation, the language used to describe this act shifted from a functional, action-oriented Egyptian vocabulary to a more theoretically rigid Greek framework, eventually resulting in a Coptic synthesis that often used a single initially dry term to encompass all forms of therapeutic exhalation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very fascinating presentation. Do you have some questions in the public? Also in the public online, if someone wants to do a question? Yes, there is one here, very far.
Thank you for your lecture. It's amazing, actually. I think till nowadays we are using such habits. It started in ancient Egypt and then in the Greek and Coptic. And till nowadays in Egypt, we are depending on the vapor and steam, and also go to the herbalist to buy the jawava leaves, for example, that are very famous here in Egypt, or the za'atar. I don't know the za'atar in English. It's kind of herb. But we boil them, and we used to use them for healing the coughs and so on. So your study is very nice, and my comment is just you have to continue with the help of Egyptians, okay, that we are famous of our traditions, and to connect modern Egypt with ancient Egypt, not only by language, but also habits and traditions that are still used till today. So thank you for your fascinating lecture.
Thank you for your commentary, because my project is also to open this analysis to Arabic sources, but if I could actually see the realia in Egypt, that would be amazing. Thank you.
I mean, like, I also agree. Thank you so much for your fascinating lecture, of course. It's very informative, and I like the continuation and you following the line. And also continuing and agreeing with Dr. Azza is that also the fumigation is among the very popular means of healing, spiritual healing as well. I also add to Azza that lots of these slang words that you might see in these papyri, especially also in Coptic, are very much used in our spoken tongue today.
Okay.
So, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck.
And how would you designate then fumigation in Arabic?
تبخير يبخر.
Okay.
It's actually
So
from the
it's
vapor. So it's
exactly, and that's
from
what
the
I wanted
vapor,
to say,
bakhar.
because bakhar and bakhur have the
Bukhur,
same,
yes, it's the same.
as the
It's
same
the same.
lexical root and shima, etc.
And the watery
So okay.
one, do you have a word for the watery one?
watery one, steam, يغلي, بخار. Actually, بخارا يبخر. It's this because it's the same concept. It's all about the steam, but it's the steam from boiling and the steam from
Okay.
burning. So
Okay,
it's actually the steam.
Yeah.
It's the technique of extracting the steam.
And the root is the same.
Yes, the بخر مبخرة بخور.
Actually, I find that very logic. Even for Egyptian, I find classical Egyptian, I find it extremely logical that they chose to use the same lexical root. The Greek is notably complicated, but also because we have already the distinction in classical medicine of dry versus moist, then is applied to dry versus moist for the therapeutics. And we have the dry versus moist for the vapor. For example, the root that I have quoted, the atma, there is a commentary on Aristotle's Meteorologica by Olympiodorus of Alexandria, 4th century CE, that explains why we use two separate words from the same root. So actually, it was really a serious thing, apparently.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really fascinating, and I love to get this glimpse of what was going on as we go through the different periods. I was wondering, because I know fermentation and fumigation mostly from the Hippocratic corpus, and there it's so, like, not completely exclusively, but largely associated with the gynecological recipes. And I was just wondering, because the first example you showed us was to do with something treating a man instead, and whether there is any change over time in the Egyptian material in terms of gendered application at all.
Okay, so thank you for the question, because it's really interesting, and I'm studying this right now. Basically, in Greek, we are mostly keen on using the fumigation for gynecological procedures, because Daniel Gurevich says that for her, from her perspective, the doctor of the Hippocratic times didn't want to touch the female patient who was menstruating or having problems conceiving, etc. So the fumigation is considered as a treatment we give to the female patient in order not to get in touch with the patient. In Egyptian, we don't have a theoretical passage about fumigation, and the only non-gendered perspective on fumigation is the one, I guess, either in the Berlin Papyrus, when we talk about general affections like the secretions, that does pulmonary diseases, or in the Brooklyn Papyrus, when the gender of the person bitten by a snake is not specified. If not, it's almost every time a female patient that is doing something, that is having something. Even because fumigation is thought as a technique that has to penetrate into a cave part of the human body. If you can see that the occurrences of fumigation, you can see that in vaginal fumigation, in the ears, for example, the fermentation we have seen in the Vienna Medical Papyrus, or for the respiratory system, we use it nowadays, we have seen. So I guess that the gender perspective is also derives from the fact that the fumigation has to be practiced where we have a canal, a natural canal. And for the evolution of fumigation, I guess that the perspective the doctor has of the female patients, that changes substantially, at least in Greek, for what I can say. Because if you compare the Hippocratic corpus occurrences of fumigation with the theoretical instances of fumigation, hence the 2 chapters of Antyllus, the surgeon of the 2nd century, when he explains what fumigation is and for what we use that, you can see a much more nuanced approach to the female body. So the female patients does not have to be fumigated until her conscience vanishes, but just until the thing is effective. That's.
Thank you, Francesco. It was really thought-provoking, and I was wondering if you thought about, of course, erotic papyrus in Turin, and the image of this peculiar thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So
thank you.
I haven't said anything.
Thank you. There is an article from Rosa Disnares Solà, in 2007. It was for the Acts of the Egyptological Congress, in which formulates the idea that this apparatus, is for fumigation, for its how do you say that in English? Contraceptive fumigation. Okay. Yeah. I don't know, because I haven't seen, at least in the Egyptian corpus, instances of contraceptive fumigation. It's always to induce birth or conception, etc. If we control the Hippocratic corpus, we can see that the substances used to enhance the possibility that a female may conceive are male urine, bull urine, some other substances, dung, etc., that are very connotated. So I don't know about contraceptive fumigation. That I don't know. Thank you.
So thank you very much again, Francesco. Now we can have our desired lunch break. So please, you are welcome to join us in the garden. And when you're going outside, please have a look also to the books from the IFAO and from the Rawi journal, which will be presented tomorrow. But they are outside at the entrance with a discount on the books from the IFAO. So thank you very much, and we will see again here in an hour.